I've always wondered why supervillains with weather machines try to go for world domination instead of patenting the technology and sitting back on a sunny beach collecting their Nobel Prize and billions of dollars in profit. The topic for today is weather control and geoengineering, essentially a second look at terraforming, but with our planet specifically in mind. How do we warm things up or cool things down? How do we make a place like the Sahara Desert a cool forest, or the Antarctic a warm jungle? How do we build islands or make inland seas drinkable? How would we build cities on the bottom of the ocean, or underground, or inside a mountain? We aren't too interested in the near-term stuff. That's not what this channel tends to be about. We also aren't going to be discussing the ethics of any of these projects or climate change. Any tinkering with the planet at this kind of scale has ethical issues that won't be black and white. It's not a lifeless rock we're terraforming, it is our own planet with its own existing ecology. As to climate change, everybody has their view on that already, and I have no interest spending my limited time discussing it when so many others have. It's totally irrelevant for our discussions today anyway, because we'll be dealing with technologies and projects that could handle the worst case scenarios of runaway greenhouse effects with a casual shrug. It's certainly an important topic, but if you're doing the stuff we'll be talking about today, it has ceased to be one. We are not controlling the weather by seeding the clouds today. We're doing it by building giant mirrors and shades in orbit, or erecting artificial mountains as windbreaks. These are the kind of all-in strategies where we are talking about turning millions of workers and trillions of dollars worth of equipment and industry on a problem. And we don't actually care today if the ocean level will rise in the future or why, just what we can do if it does. And again, this episode isn't about the ethics of any of this. Obviously, deciding to make Greenland a nice summer resort has lots of consequences and ethical dilemmas. We do not care about what those are today, though they are good and worthwhile topics for contemplation, but at the end of the day I don't have any special insights on them, and others can discuss them as well or better than I can. What I can discuss is how to make it a warm sunny day on the northern Siberian coast in the middle of December. We are going to do a little bit of history on these topics, and I should add that while it isn't necessary to have seen them before, there is material we have covered in previous episodes which I'll be skimming over here. The impact of fusion power, some of the simpler megastructures like orbital rings and launch loops, arcologies and nucleomonopolises, and the original terraforming video, and even our look at oceanic planets in the Habitable Planet series gives some of today's topics a deeper look, and viewing them afterwards might fill in some gaps. As to history, folks have wanted to change the weather and landscape for all of recorded history, and doubtless long before that. They have frequently been partially successful too, at least for the landscaping, the weather not so much. Even today, a lot of the technologies used for weather control, like cloud seeding, are viewed as dubiously effective at best. But when it comes to messing around with the ground, we had projects going on in antiquity that make even the pyramids, or the Great Wall of China, look like modest endeavors. We have seen artificial island construction all the way back to antiquity, and just about everywhere. From far west with the Aztecs of modern Mexico to far east in Micronesia, and further north in Nagasaki, and pretty much everywhere in between. The Scottish and Irish Crannogs were artificial islands. In Mesoamerica, the Aztecs built artificial islands, or maybe more peninsulas, called chinapas, into their lake to grow more food. Canals to move water for irrigation date back at least 6,000 years ago to Mesopotamia, and quickly made their way to the other floodplain civilizations in India, Egypt, and China. Those folks also built huge levees to control flooding, and eventually we saw dikes reclaiming chunks of land from the sea in places like the Netherlands. And in places with lots of steep hills like the Philippines and Peru, we saw terracing to open up new and fertile land. This was all long before we had anything like the tools we have now, often before we even had metal tools. Nowadays we have dynamite and bulldozers and huge trains and freighters to move the earth. With the advent of those things in the 19th and 20th centuries, people began getting a bit more ambitious. And with the invention of the airplane, we saw some of the first attempts at weather control, which didn't involve asking for supernatural intervention. Much of human history was one with a constant anxiety about water. not having enough so that your crops wilt, or having too much and watching your home and livelihood destroyed by storms and floods. Water was life and death to them, and it permeated every aspect of their culture. Now what causes rain? Clouds, of course, and these are made of tiny droplets of water and ice, very tiny. Now while water melts at normal pressure at 0 Celsius or 32 Fahrenheit, it doesn't actually freeze at that temperature. It can, and will in your freezer at home, but it can remain a liquid to about -40, either scale, they cross there. Water in between those temperatures is called supercooled water, and it will turn to ice at a temperature depending on the type of nuclei present. Water requires some non-gaseous surface to turn from a vapor into a liquid. When we are talking about tiny bits of dust or other contaminants,